My name is Adam. Thank you everybody for coming to our workshop tonight. I'm on the community building team for Mass 5051. Um, we really appreciate you being here for our Tech Tools for Activists workshop. I think this is a really exciting presentation, and I'm so happy to see so many of you being here thinking so as well. We will be recording this presentation, as I just mentioned. So if you're not comfortable having your video shown, you don't pressure to be on the screen. And as I mentioned a moment ago, we will be sharing this presentation both on our YouTube and our Learning Library afterwards. So if you would like to share it around or review it or take notes from that, you are more than welcome to. We do ask that if you have a clarifying question during the presentation that you throw it in the chat and I will try and grab it and throw it to Matt. But if it is a follow-up question or off-topic or tangential, we do ask that you hold it until the end. You can put it in the chat, but I will save it till the end. And without further ado, I will throw it to Matt for the presentation.
Hey everyone, thank you for attending. This is Tech Tools for Activists, Resilience, Infrastructure Awareness, and Decentralized Systems for Modern Communities. So I think we can acknowledge that this is a pivotal time in our lives right now where we're seeing the rapid emergence of technology that gives a lot of individuals and a lot of systems of governance, whether it's federal authorities or whether it's businesses or whether it's employers, the ability to, not only for us to be able to communicate back and forth, but also for them to be able to intercept and intrude on our own personal communications. And so one of the things that sparked my desire to want to run this workshop with Mass 5051 is I wanted to try and demystify some of these technologies. And I also want to be able to discuss some of the ways that these technologies, for instance, if you go to a protest, if you're going to different kinds of areas, if you want to be able to go to your freedom of rights discussions, how you can be able to leverage these technologies for your own personal benefits. The theme today is I'm going to be talking about different ways that we can use these technologies, not only for protection, but also as a means of being able to connect with other people, and also as a means of being able to help stay organized and help build and manage communities. So this workshop today discusses a lot of the so-called invisible technology systems, those being things like cloud infrastructure, wireless systems, maps, sensors, and identity systems and platforms that we're using. However, a lot of people who are using these every day don't necessarily understand them. They don't have control over them. They don't have fallback systems, and they don't necessarily recognize how dependent they are on these systems. So if, for instance, the internet cut out, or if there was a cell outage, how would you handle yourself in these situations? How would you send a distress message out? How would you then be able to connect with other people or figure out what needs to be done through mass communication? This workshop is about giving you guys the ability to be more aware, resilient, and have your own ownership over the technological systems that you depend on. So who am I? My name is Matthew. I'm a human robotics interaction researcher. I'm also a social activist and social technologist. I've done a lot of work with emerging technologies, and I've been experienced with decentralized and resilient tech. I've also been doing a lot of community organizing with both the Mass 5051 for organizing for over a year, and I've also been working with the ACLU. My own perspective is that technology is the most useful to communities when they can trust it, they can understand it, and they can adapt to it for their own means. So very clear, I want to make sure that just so you understand, so this workshop is not a hacking, and it's not going to be showing you instructions on doing penetration techniques. It's not a tactical operations workshop. It's also not promising that these are the only means of using these kinds of tools. These tools that I'm going to be discussing tonight are examples, but it's not a catch-all solution, and they're not always, it's not promising you complete anonymity or invisibility. But that's also not necessarily something you need to, that's not necessarily always an achievable goal. So what this workshop is really about is infrastructure literacy, resilience thinking, and decentralized systems using low-cost, affordable pieces of technology and low-cost decentralized systems. So technology, in my perspective, it's not just really cool gadgets and really cool hardware. It's the fundamental relationship between the networks of people, systems, infrastructure, and trust that come about through being able to use these systems as you understand them and as you're able to connect with other people. It allows communities to communicate, organize, and function together. And modern systems only really work because these technical systems and human systems interact together. Consider this: a phone mesh or a pager system or an encrypted drive is only as useful if people can understand how it works, and also they can understand how and when to use it. Pagers used to be huge in the 90s, and now they've kind of fallen off. Same thing with a lot of other different forms of what we thought were permanent pieces of technology that have been kind of falling down the wayside. And my goal is to show that these aren't magical devices. These are systems that you can understand and learn how to leverage. Additionally, activism is not just protesting. Communities that rely on communication, trust, and coordination and resilient infrastructure in order to organize also need to use, as we live in the 21st century, modern technologies for communication. I'm sure a lot of you have used Signal. I'm sure a lot of you have used things like Telegram and Discord. And as we've been using these kinds of systems, I think it's increasingly more important to realize that these centralized technological systems and the technological literacy that comes about them is increasingly more important. Who owns your data? Who owns this kind of information? It's not just about privacy, but it's also understanding what kinds of fallback systems you have if these central repositories for communicating back and forth aren't reliable, or if they go out. So how do communities build resilient relationships using these kinds of tech? So the way that I've kind of structured this is 3 pillars of tech preparedness. First level is personal resilience. Second level is community infrastructure. And the third system is systems awareness. At the first level, we have how individuals reduce technological fragility and dependency. Second one is how communities build decentralized and local systems. And the third one is how modern environments are increasingly using more sensor-rich and technical systems for communicating back and forth, and how you exist within a larger ecosystem of these sensor-rich technologies that is not only leveraged by important to activists, law enforcement, or different individuals of unwanted means, or even, for instance, how governments or different large businesses or even big tech corporations are leveraging them, and what you can be aware of. So for personal resilience, resilience in engineering is defined as it's other means to avoid a single point of failure. Think of it like this: your smartphone collapses so much of what you use. Think of the amount of devices that I used to use, whether it was Garmin GPS devices, messaging systems, internet devices. They've collapsed them all into a single centralized device. However, if, for instance, I wanted to have full control over for instance, many of you may use Google Storage, or many of you may use other different means of uploading your information to cloud-based storage systems. I would say that you don't necessarily have full control over it if you use Google Maps. Do you really own the maps that are within Google, or do you have to offload them? And what happens if those systems go away? What happens if you no longer have access to Google? What happens when your phone gets taken out of protest? That's why resilient systems is the first pillar for this. You want to avoid a single point of failure. So what I recommend is compartmentalization. Compartmentalization is the intentional separation of systems, devices, identities, or workflows in order to reduce single points of failure. If you consider that any dedicated device, for instance, if you have a single smartphone, if it can be, you may think that this is a fragile locked down device that's secure. You've run all of the necessary gone through the cybersecurity class, you know exactly what a VPN is. But even then, that is still just one small, fragile system that could be, if you were to lose access to it even, that represents something that represents your personal identity and also represents other means of communicating back and forth. So that's why I think a lot of activist circles recommend burner phones. What burner phones are useful for, and I want to emphasize that burner smartphones over just the traditional the burner dumb phones, is that it helps you keep information optimized for activism, such as Signal, such as your Telegram, without putting services like Google or ones that you use on your daily basis on top of them. And so it allows you to be aware of the cloud services that you're installing on them. One of the things I did recently when I got a new burner phone was I removed all of the Google applications from it, and I only installed specifically dedicated local drives and local information that I could get from it. You don't have to be invisible, by which I mean you don't have to completely remove yourself from the cloud, but you should try to think about how to reduce the amounts of personal exposure from your smartphone that you use as your daily driver. Going further for this, kind of the phones that I recommend for burner phones would be anything that's at least 2019, if not 2021, like a good, solid, modern Android device that can still download the latest software threat protection. If you had a 2022 onwards phone, even if, for instance, you don't use it with a SIM card, know that these kinds of devices have stronger security. They have, Samsung has Knox, Google has Titan. It's better to lock down these kinds of devices when necessary. And what's beneficial about these devices is that they have access to the newer Wi-Fi signals and LTE signals. So, for instance, if you want to go to a protest and you want to disable 2.4 gigahertz downgrading, which is what a lot of cell site simulators do, you have the ability to do that within your smartphones. Secondly, encrypted cloud drives versus local drives. So consider the amount of information that you have currently on the cloud. I'm sure that for a lot of you, it's, including to myself, I should say, a lot of my healthcare information is on my Google Drive, a lot of my personal identification, my information for my rent, my housing, things like that. That's all on the Google, on the cloud. Do I really want this information to be directly tied to the information that I will be using for activism, for work that I'm going to be talking about for, things that could be, personally viable, or things like if the government were to apprehend anything, or even just the ability of not wanting so much information about me floating around online if, for instance, a website went down, or, understanding what kind of information that websites take from you. That's why I recommend that local drives and local copies can help with compartmentalization, such as personal private information is best stored on both online and local vaults. So for cloud examples, I recommend there's a few websites called Proton Drive and CryptPad. I'm sure that a few people have used these before. If you haven't, these are more secure than Google. They allow for higher degrees of password protection and authentication protection. And for local, I recommend programs like Veracrypt, which can be used for encrypting USB drives, and also something like the Aegis password protected USB drive. I have one of these, and it's great. I can just have a password on my phone, on my USB drive, and it works the same way that, kind of like a combination lock. I can just type it in and I can plug it into any device. And if I unplug it, then no one else can get access to this kind of information. Third, think about everyday resilience tools. Again, the goal is not to rely on a single platform for everything and to focus on things like compartmentalization. KeePass, for instance, I'm not sure if any of you have used password managers, for instance, but KeePass XC is a really good example of a program that you can use for protecting and locking down the amount of passwords that you have in Google or on online websites or other areas. I recommend also having things like a solar charger battery in case power goes down. There's different devices for getting Wikipedia offline. A lot of these devices I'm going to be listing out, and I will be offering links for those if you want to get a little bit more about, but these are just considered some examples of some of the tools that I would recommend people considering so that you're not constrained to any singular point of accessing information or even like downloading applications. For instance, if you have a phone that you want to be able to sideload applications without having to give, for my Pixel phone, for instance, I have to go through Google and I have to go through Play Store. Alternatively, F-Droid exists, and that's an alternative app store where you can download a lot of these useful, beneficial apps, and you can download them without having to give information to Google. Additionally, things like an MP3 player or having things like a notebook, those are also good ways of separating the amount of uses that you would need from your daily phone from something like Spotify or something like OneNote, and being able to keep offline secure ways of protecting them. So level 2, community infrastructure. How do communities maintain communication and information access without centralized systems? Again, think about the ways that we were introducing personal resilience. I recommend redundancy, local first systems, distributed trust across different devices and different means, resilient communication, and shared infrastructure. As an example, I'm putting consider the little lending libraries that you have around Massachusetts. You can have one. This is a example of the kinds of information that you can kind of put inside of this, and other people can have access to it. It's whether it's maintained by one individual, or whether it's maintained by whether it's a business or whether it's a a nonprofit organization, is something that you want to consider. And that same metaphor applies for cloud and local drives. So the example for this comparison would this be local information systems. These are physical storage devices that you can store your information and files on hand, and they can exist in a physical location. For instance, it's a computer or as a backup drive, and you can allow other people to access it from online. So it allows you to preserve information from giant tech corporations. They can't force you to delete anything. They can't pull anything away from you. They can't pull their access away from you. You control who gets to see it, and you control who gets to operate and pull information from it. And it keeps you in control of these systems as a means of backup. As an addition, it can also survive outages, and it can remain locally accessible. For instance, if you want to pull any information from it. Examples of this would be Nextcloud or a Raspberry Pi internet-connected shared storage. And by which I mean this is going to be an example of a local NAS. So for those of you who don't know, NAS stands for Network Accessible System. Compare this to something like a cloud storage where you have recurring fees, you have internet dependency, you have rented data. You don't own the system. I don't own Google Drive. I don't even own something like Proton Drive for putting my information up there, but it's a convenience for being able to share this information back and forth. Benefit of local NAS is that you make a one-time purchase of the hardware itself. I then own the drives. I then own the information. Anything I put up, I am in full control over, and I'm also in control of whoever wants to get access to it. And it's a local network speed, which means it's all running from devices that I have connected to my internet at home. Second, decentralized communication systems. So consider this. What happens to communication during internet outages and isolated crackdowns in overloaded environments? If any of you have taken your phone to a protest, which, we've all done this before, but if you've ever tried sending a message out from there, you'll notice that the LTE signal can be extremely clogged and can be extremely difficult to send a message out. On top of that, consider instances where there's maybe an internet blackout, or there could be SIM blackouts or LTE systems outages. An example would be this year, over 28,000 Verizon users and 400 T-Mobile users and 300 AT&T users lost access to their mobile data during this widespread blackout. So in terms of discussing redundancy and resiliency, consider that tools like MeshCore and Meshtastic, these are low-powered, centralized, off-grid capable electronic boards that allow for their own means of text communication. There's no cellular plan, and you can use them in overloaded environments. You download this app on your phone, and you can send encrypted messages through it to other people who have the devices. Trade-offs can be that it's slightly complex and it takes a little bit more of like slightly more hardware knowledge to understand, and it's a little bit slower than LTE. But the trade-offs for that is that you get to have a widespread system that is community distributed. The benefit of us being in New England right now is that there are over 600 nodes, nodes being those small little devices that can take a message, forward it. If I were to have one of these boards, for instance, I can send a message from one of these, and someone else with a similar device can also receive this information. Now, if I'm separated across more than 1.5 miles, I can put another device in the middle, like a repeater, and this kind of works as a middleman. I send a message out, the repeater or the middleman can take that message, and then while still being encrypted and while still being controlled, can forward it over to the next person who I want. So therefore, you can think of it as if you connected a chain of these together, you suddenly have not just communication across Boston, but we've also noticed as part of the MeshCore community, these kinds of communications that can happen all the way over to Connecticut or New Hampshire simply by having this level of package and repeat and resend. As an example of this is your house here. You can connect 2 or 3 of them in sequence, and you can reach your friend's house. And it's just a systematic way of chaining a lot of this communication systems that you yourself control and you yourself can operate with, and fitting it within the larger ecosystem of like the New England community. Third, embedded information systems. How do communities share information when internet access, apps, and centralized platforms become unreliable? So I've discussed NAS systems before, and I've discussed things like local hard drives and password encrypted USB drives. But there's an even simpler way for passing this kind of information, especially if you want to pass information quickly in physical spaces. Examples of this would be things like physical digital information systems that don't require batteries, that don't require things like internet communication, but can also be used to quickly store and quickly pass over information. So NFC tags, QR systems, and information can do things like information drops and emergency resource access. An example of this would be near field communication tags. These tags can be infinitely reconfigurable. It only stores a few kilobytes of information, but the amount of things that you can do on these is insurmountable. For instance, this is an example of a tap to vote. Someone had a QR code and an NFC tag where you could just tap your phone and it opens up a web link on your device that shows this is how you register to vote. Interesting. A bit of a side note before this was, before I got connected with 5051, I had a variety of NFC tags very similar to the one in the right-hand corner. And before the immigration crackdown happened, I was using it to have access to, I would store links to Red Books and legal help for immigrant communities. And I was just kind of sticking them around different areas in the Suffolk and Boston region. And so you just have to tap the phone, and then you could get a lot of the information from this without having to go through like a central repository or a place that could be, privately controlled. Level 3, systems awareness. So this is where I want to be able to emphasize that everything that we've been talking about right now, from how these different devices and how these pieces of technology and how the communication networks operate back and forth, are fundamentally all connected with each other. The modern environments are increasingly automated, sensor-rich, and infrastructure-mediated. A lot of people who move through them, for instance, if you're connecting to a Wi-Fi network or you're scanning a BLE, Bluetooth Low Energy device and connecting your phone to it, you may not necessarily think about all of the ways in which the signals and these devices can communicate back and forth with each other. However, understand that hidden wireless systems and networks shape movement, communication, and public access, and identity, coordination, and governance. What's really important about this is that individuals who, if you don't control the system controls you. For instance, for this reason, if you are reliant on other means of, if you're going, everyone goes through an internet service provider, and understand that the kinds of companies, think about the telecom companies and then the different systems that operate with telecom companies, whether it's the FCC or whether it's the other agencies that are able to pull this information from. Think about the information that kind of gets passed through. It's not just your MAC addresses and your devices, but it's also your identification. Sometimes if they're a little bit more sneaky, they can also pull specific websites and vendor IDs from your devices and also use that as a means of tracking you. However, as I've mentioned before, the goal is not to be 100% untraceable. It is, however, to be aware that these kinds of infrastructure exists and the kinds of leakages and also the kinds of wireless systems that are around you all the time. Understanding how these systems operate will help communities make more intentional choices. So as an example, I've done a lot of work with IoT and consider all of the devices that are internet connected right now from in a smart city, whether it's energy, whether it's parking lots, whether it's citywide Wi-Fi, all of these devices are using the wireless signals of internet, sometimes also Zigbee or 2.4 gigahertz radio signals back and forth to be able to speak with each other. So going forwards right now, just keep this in mind that all of these systems that we operate with and we kind of take for granted may be collecting information, but it's also things that we ourselves can be aware of and we can learn how to leverage information from them. So knowing which public infrastructure records are publicly available. As I've mentioned, wireless devices require FCC, they have to go through the FCC for registering any kind of signal that they're going to be operating with. This is really important because all of this information that goes, if the device has a MAC address or it goes through the FCC, this information can then be ascertained by any one of us online for free. The benefit of this is that you can be better informed about how certain devices operate and how they can be used. A really good website that I like is called FCCID. FCCID.io has publicly available schematics, RF tests, and diagnostics for different kinds of tools and services that you may see online. So for instance, if I want to see what kind of RF signals my MacBook computer puts out, or if I want to see what kind of signals my cell phone puts out, I can look up the device under the FCC ID. It will give me internal photos, and it will also give me the RF exposure and all of the different wavebands that it operates under. This is a really good way of being able to cross-reference some of these MAC addresses, IDs, and vendor information for my own end, especially if I want to say, hey, what kind of information in metadata is my device leaking? Additionally, websites like wiggle.net are comprised of crowdsourced information of publicly wireless environment data. So it contains information like Wi-Fi networks, Bluetooth networks, and LTE signals. A lot of these they comprise on a map, and it shows you the GPS locations of each of these signals. If I wanted to see what kind of information my house is even getting out, or even where is the nearest Verizon tower, I can go online, I can see publicly available maps of wireless signal communications as devices are speaking back and forth with each other. This gives me a really good understanding of the wireless ecosystems and the public access visibility that not just I would want to know for my own personal needs for activism, but also the kinds of information that a lot of agencies and a lot of bad actors may also be trying to infiltrate and take information from. So example 3 is using these kind of signals and awareness tools. So how can we detect purposely hidden or undetectable systems around us? I'm not sure if any of you have read the story of in last year in December 2025, there was actually a news report that went out that of Airbnbs that were using hidden cameras and placing them inside of their rooms without the tenants' knowledge. And the owners were able to, who knows what, they were able to use these kinds of cameras for spying on them. The benefit of the kinds of signals I've mentioned before, even though it may seem like these devices are magical and they turn on and they just somehow work, what the really underlying infrastructure that's supporting these is Bluetooth Low Energy and Wi-Fi, and sometimes LTE if it's a fully off disconnected device. But there exists tools, especially tools that you can download on your burner phone, that allow you to be aware of these kinds of signals in real time. So as an example, on the left, I have a screenshot from a tool that I like called BLE Radar. This gives me all of the GPS coordinates and locations of different Bluetooth MAC addresses I may have picked up from my phone. If I were to be running this app in the background, it gives me the time and place, it gives me the address, it gives me the manufacturer. And this kind of information I can then be using to cross-reference with FCC ID. On the right, I have Network Scanner. And think of how many devices you have that are connected on an IP network or on Wi-Fi. If I'm on a public Wi-Fi device or a public Wi-Fi access, and I wanted to see the kinds of systems that are also connected on that same Wi-Fi network, I can run a network scanner, and it will give me the IP addresses as well as the names of each of the devices that are connected to it. And this is a really good way, as someone who's done this kind of network testing before, for me to kind of understand these are the kinds of devices that even if I can't see them, I can still detect them in my area. So final takeaways. Technology is not just about gadgets and hardware. It's about the interconnected relations between tools, infrastructure, trust, and communities. We want resilient systems that avoid a single point of failure. Trust comes from transparency and reliability. Local first systems such as encrypted drives and having both an online information and also offline information helps improve the resilience. Decentralized systems can reduce dependency and concentration, and modern environments are increasingly sensor rich. Thank you very much.